Okay, I want to talk to you about the low frequency oscillator and its incredible power. And I kind of came up with an interesting way of doing this. Okay, right now I have one oscillator on playing a sawtooth, but I'm going to turn it off so we can't hear it. Okay, now we can't hear anything. Okay, the low frequency oscillator sends, I'm going to talk about this in analog terms because that's how I think of things. The low frequency oscillator is just an oscillator whose waveform is too slow to be perceived by our ears, but is able to generate control voltage changes over periods of times in the wave shape that you define and the frequency that you define. And this LFO is no different. We have the ability to choose the wave shape. There's a knob for that if we want to use it. Triangle, reverse saw, sawtooth, square, pulse, pulse 2, pulse 3, and random. Those are all awesome. But, that's a ridiculous thing to say. Those are all awesome. I'm going to go with square. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set a frequency of 40. We'll see how that goes. And an amount of 127. I'm going to skip sync for right now. We'll get to that. I'm going to go to LFO destination. Now remember, our oscillator's off, but that doesn't mean it's not accessible by control voltage functions like the LFO. So I'm going to direct this low frequency oscillator to the level of oscillator 1. Okay, what you're hearing is the square wave acting as the level control of oscillator 1. It's some amplitude modulation coming from the low frequency oscillator, which is to say this slow moving oscillator has a very slow square wave that when it's in the up position, it's causing the volume of oscillator 1 to become audible. And when it's down, it's inaudible. So we can control the frequency of this effect. We can do that over here too. See, it's too slow right now. It's in a down position. It'll be in the up position for a while. But we can control this frequency and get it going pretty fast. In a weird way, right now, this LFO is kind of acting like an envelope generator. But we're not going to talk about that because it's crazy. Okay, so what we're really doing right now is we're using the LFO to modulate the amplitude of the oscillator. And we've covered the square wave. Here, let's change the shape so we can hear the difference. That's the triangle wave. That's the reverse saw wave. This is the sawtooth. Square, we heard. Pulse. Pulse 2. Pulse 3. You can see that pulse width getting smaller and smaller. And then random. Now, we have this function called LFO control, which still allows us to see what wave it's on. I'm going to do something here. I'm going to, shape's down here. I'm going to go back to square for the simplicity of it. Then we have this thing called slew rate. And a slew rate, put simply, affects how quickly changes can be made. And if we're looking at this square wave, changes are being made very fast. You've got instantly a high level and instantly a low level. So what the slew rate does, it actually wears that square into a hump. Let's listen. You can actually make it into a sort of sine wave, which goes up and we have volume and goes down and we don't have volume. But that's a nice functionality because it allows you to change these various waveforms to suit your tastes. you can make them more subtle and less pointed or square. And it's really fun. This is one of my favorite things. I love it when you have the ability to do this with a sample and hold or random waveform. You can hear it getting more and more, or less and less distinct as you sort of round the corners with the slew rate. But anyway, so we have the LFO destination, which we've already set, and the control. Phase, let's do an experiment to show you what will happen with phase. Okay. So we have an LFO1 is a square wave set to 88 of frequency and 127 of amount. Let's go to LFO2. We'll set the shape to square, frequency to 88. And the amount to 127. Let's see, do we have any fun slew stuff going on? We don't need any fun slew stuff. Okay. We're going to direct oscillator. We're going to direct low frequency oscillator 2 to the level of oscillator 2. And we're going to change oscillator 2's pitch so that we can distinguish it from oscillator 1. So here we go. What happens? They are in time with each other. Now, if we go over to phase, we can make it so they're right in time with each other by changing the wave reset so that every time you press the key, the LFO starts at the same place. It is not free running. It starts in the same place every time you press the key. But then you're guaranteed to get these things going at the same time no matter what. Unless you mess with the phase. The phase was grayed out and now it is not. So let's go to the phase of oscillator 2. By affecting the phase, you have the ability to offset. You can make sure that it always starts in the same place so that your modulation always sounds the way you want it to, but you can make it so that the modulation does not happen at the same time. So let's do something more fun than that though, and go back to our frequency, and we'll change that, and we'll go to LFO control, we'll increase the slew rate. So that's what you can do with the LFO, and you can direct that to almost anywhere. We'll look at that. First though, let's have a little fun and let's do even more. We'll get a really fast frequency up here. We'll sync it, or no, we won't sync it. We'll talk about that in a second. The wave reset, set some random phase. We'll set it to oscillator 3's level. Okay, so we got this crazy thing going on. We're hearing the LFOs triggering all of these different oscillators. But what if we want them to be in time with each other? Certainly we could mess with the phase and hope that that worked out for the best. Or we can do this trick, which is sync. Now sync sets all of these up to the clock, and I believe it's to the clock of the sequencer. I think like we have a little bit of phase going on here. Let's turn the slew rate just to be clear. There's our phase. Okay. So now what we can do, since we have them synced, is our frequency turns into note values. Right now they're all set to a quarter. So let's set low frequency oscillator 2 to an eighth note, and then oscillator 3 to a 16th note triplet. Let's see what happens. Okay, and you can basically not only make sure that your LFO resets with each playing, but also that it's playing in metric time with a clock, so that you can time your LFO effects to whatever you may be programming this to. And that's really convenient for a lot of people. But that is basically the LFO. And let's look at some of these destinations. Oscillator frequency of all three oscillators. Oscillator frequency of all oscillators at once. Level of oscillator 1, oscillator 2, oscillator 3, oscillator 4. Shape mod, you can use this to modulate the shape. We did that in the analog section of all four oscillators. The sub-oscillator level, you can cause the sub-oscillator to come in and out, if that's what you'd like. The frequency modulation of all four oscillators and all four oscillators together as well. The amplitude modulation of all four oscillators and all four oscillators together as well. The slop of all of them. So basically, you can set the slop so that their pitches are kind of sliding, and then you can control how those slide overall with an LFO setting, which helps, again, bring sort of frequency variability into your sound, which in the case of an analog synth sound makes it sound very real. And the same if you're creating some sort of acoustic sounding patch. Air, the function that we have here in the oscillator that adds high frequencies to a sound. Girth, the function that we have here in the character that adds sort of a low end fat sound to the sound. Hack, decimate, and drive, the other character functions, they can be manipulated with the LFO. What else do we have? We have the filter 1 cutoff, filter 1 resonance, filter 2 cutoff, filter 2 resonance, filter 2 LP notch HP. That's the modulation that I talked about in the filter section, where this can be modulated using the LFO and varied with these various waveforms. That seems like a thing that everyone should want to hear. So let's turn these off for a second, because that'll be faster. Let's give this guy a nice triangle, a decent frequency, a great amount. And let's get oscillator 4 going, just in general. Okay, so oscillator 4 is our friend. We have the destination being this filter. Let's speed that modulation up a bit. So basically what we're hearing is this knob being turned. And of course, where you set it will cause the modulation to sound differently. That's very uncommon filter modulation. We also have the ability to modulate the bandpass. We don't even have the bandpass on, so that's pretty cool. It sounded cooler when we didn't have it on. Okay. We also, the filter out mix, the serial parallel, which is interesting. If we turn that off. can definitely create some interesting effects with that. In this instance, you're hearing the LFO causing the distortion to come in and out. That's right, voltage controlled effects, or digitally controlled effects. I'm not entirely sure. But in any case, who cares? That is absolutely cool. Feedback amount. If you turn the feedback up, you can hear that effect a little bit more. What else? What other treats do we have? Feedback tuning, delay amounts, you can control those. Delay times, you can control those. Delay feedback, we have LFO controlled feedback, delay feedback control. The panning as well. The LFO frequencies, you can modulate the frequency of the LFO with the LFO itself. LFO amounts, envelope amounts, envelope attacks, decays, releases, modulation amounts. We'll get into the modulation assigned source in another video. Outputs, CV outs, sequencer out, and that's pretty much it. So that's pretty much it. That makes it sound like it's barely anything. You can control pretty much everything with the LFO, and there's 4 of them, and they're complex, and they can be timed, and they can restart. They have a variety of waveforms that you can change with the slew rate. Yeah, the LFO section is extremely powerful in this synthesizer.